The night seemed ordinary to most who gazed up at the sky, but for those who gathered at Cape Canaveral and millions more watching around the world, the moment when the Falcon 9's engines roared to life and painted the horizon with fire was anything but ordinary. Because this was not just another commercial launch, not just another payload bound for orbit. This was a mission steeped in secrecy. Carrying instruments and eyes sharper than any that had flown before. Tools built not only to measure, but to pierce, to see beneath the moon's dusty crust where mysteries had whispered for decades, mysteries that began with Apollo's seismic tests, when astronauts set down sensors and the data came back with something shocking. The moon rang like a bell, its echoes reverberating far longer than they should have, as if it were hollow, or contained vast empty caverns beneath its surface, and those findings, hidden away in classified reports, were followed by more unexplained magnetic scars that twisted compasses into madness, fleeting flashes of light in places no sunlight reached, and signals intercepted by radio telescopes, faint and fragmented but pulsing with patterns too precise to dismiss as static. And so the Falcon 9 had been chosen, sleek and reliable, the workhorse of SpaceX, but this time its mission carried an extra weight. For its payload was designed not merely for observation but for revelation, carrying advanced ground-penetrating radar, high-resolution imaging systems, and experimental instruments never before revealed to the public. And as the rocket thundered upward, its 9 engines burning with fury, billions of tons of thrust shoving humanity's questions into the heavens, the ground shook, the air quaked, and the line between ordinary exploration and extraordinary discovery was being crossed, though very few outside the tightest circles of NASA, SpaceX, and certain classified branches of government truly knew what was at stake, because behind the polished press releases and cheerful words about exploration, there was fear, a fear rooted in what had already been glimpsed but never explained, images smoothed over, audio cut, files redacted until they were nothing but shadows, and now, at last, humanity had built a machine to go back, to look deeper, to listen harder, and to uncover what had been buried, hidden beneath a veil of dust for eons, waiting in silence. And as the Falcon 9 pierced the atmosphere and cast off its first stage, falling back toward the Earth for a landing attempt that would distract the watching public, the second stage carried its secret cargo higher, faster, pushing it toward the moon, and inside the control rooms, faces tight with anticipation, scientists watched their monitors flicker with the data already streaming back from instruments warming to life. And though nothing extraordinary had yet been seen, the unease in their eyes betrayed what they feared. That the anomalies long dismissed as myth or madness would prove to be real, that the moon was not just a lifeless rock but something more, a vault, a machine, a monument, or worse, a graveyard of something ancient. And as the rocket arced silently through space, cutting through the void with precision, the Earth shrank into a fragile sphere of blue and white behind it, and ahead, the moon swelled in the windows of the capsule carrying the instruments, its bright face glowing with deceptive familiarity, while its hidden truth lay in the shadows and depths beneath, where no human had yet dared to look deeply enough. And the thought that haunted every mind in the mission was not whether they could uncover what was buried, but whether they should, because once the secrets were revealed, there would be no going back, no undoing the knowledge, no unlearning the truth, and perhaps, as the whispers of Apollo had always warned, some truths were never meant for us to know. And so, as the Falcon 9's secret payload drifted closer to the moon and its instruments calibrated themselves against the emptiness of space, the mission crossed the invisible boundary between exploration and intrusion, for the closer they drew to that gray world, the stronger the unease grew inside both the astronauts and the silent rooms of mission control back on Earth. Because every time humanity had tried to probe beneath the moon before, the results had raised more questions than answers. From the Apollo seismic tests that made the moon ring as though it were hollow, to the radar scans that revealed massive voids beneath the crust, to the flashes of light recorded from craters shrouded in shadow, and yet no one had ever dared to go deeper, to truly dig past the surface layer of dust into the ancient bones of that celestial body. And now this mission was poised to do exactly that, to strike at the very secrets that had been whispered about for decades. Secrets that some claimed were the reason why the Apollo program was abandoned so suddenly despite its historic success. And as the capsule slipped into lunar orbit, the astronauts gazed out at the familiar face of the moon, the bright plains, the dark seas of basalt, the craters like scars from forgotten battles, yet their eyes kept drifting to the far horizon, knowing that on the hidden side, invisible from Earth, their instruments would soon descend, burrowing deeper than any probe had ever gone. And it was in that silence, in those first orbits, that the unease began to take form, because the radar sweeps, the very first test scans conducted before deployment, came back with echoes that were not expected, echoes that suggested dense structures buried deep, symmetrical voids arranged in ways nature rarely mimics, and lines of magnetic distortion that formed patterns almost like circuitry sprawled across the lunar bedrock. And in the control room on Earth, the scientists stared at the data streaming across their screens, their mouths dry, because they knew. Natural geology did not produce such shapes, and whispers passed between them, whispers quickly silenced when supervisors walked by, and one word hovered unspoken but undeniable: artificial. And as the astronauts prepared to release the lander, their commander glanced at the printouts sent through encrypted channels, the patterns that looked less like caves and more like chambers, less like cracks and more like corridors. And though no one dared say it aloud, they were beginning to understand that the moon might not be merely a satellite of Earth, but something far older, far stranger, and perhaps not even natural at all. And yet the mission pushed forward, because to turn back now would be to admit fear, to confess that the moon itself might be more than humanity could handle. And so the lander detached, its thrusters firing gently, lowering it toward a crater near the lunar south pole where shadows stretched into eternity. And as its instruments reached for the surface, they activated the ground-penetrating radar at full strength, sending deep pulses into the crust, and what came back was unlike anything ever recorded: layers of dust, then fractured rock, but beneath that a vast hollow region stretching for miles, with walls smooth and reflective, as if carved, and at the heart of that void something massive, dense, and geometric, its outline forming a perfect hexagon. A shape no natural process could explain, and when those readings reached Earth, the silence in the control room was suffocating, because this was no longer theory, no longer anomaly, but evidence, cold and undeniable, that something had been constructed beneath the moon's surface, something buried for uncountable ages. And as the data continued to flow, faint signals began to bleed into the radar's return, not random noise, but pulses of energy repeating in rhythms, like a beacon that had lain dormant until the probes disturbed it. And in that moment, both in orbit above the moon and on Earth below, hearts pounded with the same dread-filled question: had they just awakened something that was never meant to be touched? And if so, what would it do now that it knew we were here?